This is the brand new Rlaarlo ROG1, and if this thing turns out to be good, this could be the mini basher we've all been waiting for. The very first thing you'll notice when you get one of these is how heavy it is. This thing is built like a little tank, and I'm hoping it's gonna be durable like a tank too. I think this body looks pretty good. I'm not a huge fan of the paint design, but it definitely doesn't look bad and doesn't have a bunch of greebling on it. We've got some pretty cool details in the bed of the truck. This is not a clipless body design, which should make some people pretty happy. Removing these clips, which are retained by clip retainers, and pulling the body off, we can see we've got a fairly standard looking body here, although there is an interesting detail here in the back where the rear mount is. There's a hole in the Lexan body, and the body mount goes through this hard plastic piece, which should make this area a lot stronger. In the front, the holes are just standard through the body itself. The body is reasonably thick and should be fine for this type of vehicle. We've got roof skids and a little rack, which should help with strength as well, and a few cool little details like mirrors, which will probably get ripped off fairly easily. As you can see, the ROG1 is significantly larger than the Arrma Grom, being both longer and taller. It's also quite a bit heavier, which could be an advantage or a disadvantage. If you've ever seen a Rlaarlo Omni Terminator, this is gonna look pretty familiar to you because this is basically a mini Omni Terminator. Under the hood, we've got a 3S brushless ESC along with a 3S battery. And to go along with that, we've got a brushless motor on an adjustable mount. We'll take a closer look at that in just a minute. I'm excited about these tires. Unlike on a lot of cars this size, these tires are actually pretty decently sized. And whereas they are using a small non-serrated nut, these nuts are nylock, and we are running on standard 12mm hexes here, which means regular 12mm wheels will fit. These tires appear to be a unique tread pattern, and they are foam filled. They're about 87mm in diameter and about 44mm wide. And I think these wheels and tires are gonna follow a theme for this truck. They are pretty heavy. Like I said, the power system on this truck is 3S. However, assuming this thing survives 3S bashing, we are definitely gonna be putting 4S on it. I've had some people ask me why I overpower things and why I tend to bash a little bit harder than many things are designed for. And the reason is I need to find out what these platforms can actually handle. And if we bash them just within their normal limitations, often we're not going to find those limits. Now, if you enjoy watching me find the limits on these vehicles so you don't have to, make sure you get subscribed because we've got a bunch more of that coming. Taking a closer look at this platform, we've got a nice big bumper, aluminum threaded body shocks, aluminum shock towers, plastic body mounts, a mostly plastic brace system with an ESC and receiver box in the middle. We can see the other metal tower back here, plastic links with adjustable steel turnbuckles, sway bars in the rear and in the front, which should really help handling, standard plastic kingpin suspension in the front, as well as hubs in the back. On the bottom, we can see we have a nice, thick aluminum chassis. This thing should be pretty durable for the size of this truck. To take a closer look at this drivetrain, first thing I want to do is remove this battery. This battery tray is kind of interesting. This is a 2200 milliamp hour 3S LiPo. However, it's kind of trapped underneath the center brace. You can bend this side pod down though, which makes installing and removing it easier. The downside of this is you're going to be limited in height for the batteries you want to put in here. This battery is about 22 millimeters tall, and that's about all you're going to be able to get underneath here. It is also 34 millimeters wide, which is pretty close to the maximum width, and it's about 105 millimeters long, though you should be able to get a few more millimeters in length. It looks like this entire electronics area might be able to hinge up from the front. Let's take a closer look at that. This particular screw is a 2mm, but unfortunately a lot of the screws on this chassis are going to be 1.5mm, which can be a little bit of a challenge, especially if you don't have good tools. Now, taking that one screw out does allow us to lift this up. Unfortunately, we're restricted by the location of the power button, and I don't think taking this zip tie off is going to give us enough slack, but let's find out. Now that might. Go ahead and get these motor wires out of here. These motor wires are not standard 4mm. These bullets are actually 3.5mm. If you're gonna use a different ESC, you're probably gonna have to adapt these motor wires or make adapters, which is what we're gonna do in this video. Removing those allows us to go ahead and hinge this up to some degree, not too far. That does, however, give us enough access to adjust that slipper clutch, which is pretty convenient. One more screw lets us remove this electronics module completely, though it is still tied to the servo, so you can't quite take it off the car, but we can get it out of the way. That gives us a better look at the motor. This brushless motor is a 2485, and it is 3600 kV, which is already pretty high for 3S and might be a little bit too high for 4S. This is a 60 amp sensorless ESC. It comes with an XT60, which should be just fine for this. It's nice to see that this is a genuine AMAS XT60. The brand of connector you get is important. Cheap connectors will not carry as much current as good name brand connectors. It's good to see a good name brand connector on this car. This ESC is attached to the mount with what feels like a new type of double-sided tape, which is really nice to see because the tape they used on pretty much every previous Rlaarlo did not hold. Removing the receiver box cover, we can see that this is not a waterproof receiver box. However, the manual does specifically call out this car for being water resistant. So let's take a closer look at this receiver and see if they're telling the truth. This appears to be a fairly standard 6-channel radio link style receiver. That receiver is going to be run by this pretty basic controller. We've seen this in a lot of other vehicles. This does have a throttle limit, which allows you to dial it down to run this thing more slowly for little kids or if this is your first car. Now, if we pop the bottom off this receiver, I'm hoping to find some conformal coating on it to give us that water resistant rating. And yes, there is some shininess on here, so it does appear as though it has been conformally coated. It's not quite as thick as I would like to see, but it'll probably be sufficient. And while we're looking at electronics, might as well take a look at this servo. First thing I notice is this servo horn is plastic and appears to be pretty flexible. Whether or not that's actually going to be a problem, I'm not sure. We'll just have to wait and see when we bash it. There is a little screw hole here that allows you to take the screw out of the servo horn, and then we can just take these screws out of the bottom and take the servo out. When you're working with 1.5mm screws, make sure that the socket is clean and that the bit is all the way in before you start trying to remove it. Otherwise, you might strip the screw. I'm not sure this slot was really well thought out. The screw doesn't actually come all the way out. I suppose we could still get the servo out of here, but let's just take this side pod off and get it out of the way. There we go, and these plastics do feel pretty good. You can tell they do have some glass fiber content, and the molds look to be of really good quality. Interestingly, this front mount is actually a slot, which means this is designed to work with multiple different size servos. This servo is not a standard micro size though, so you are going to be limited in what kind of servos you can use. And we do not have an O-ring on this screw, which means that this is not going to be that water resistant. Though by the design of these servos, they are at least somewhat water resistant just because there aren't that many ways for water to get in. Popping the bottom off here, we can see we've got a fairly standard looking brushed servo with a circuit board that's just sort of loose in there. Removing the top cover, we can see we do have mostly metal gears in here. There actually is one plastic gear hiding there in the bottom. And I believe these gears are going to be aluminum. Yes, these are all aluminum gears, which is fine, better than plastic, but not quite as good as steel. And then we do not have an O-ring here in the top. So this servo is not specifically waterproofed in any way. With all that out of the way, we can see a nice adjustable servo saver. And if you're familiar with the Omni Terminator, the quality of this will feel very familiar to you. This has that super dense, high quality feel to it. We've got 2 screws to remove the pinion cover. We can see we've got a steel pinion here. And then removing this sliding adjustable motor mount, we can take the motor out, which gives us a closer look at that gear and the mount itself. So far, everything's looking good. We've got thread locker on the screws. And I have to say, from what I'm seeing so far, this thing kind of feels like what the Grom should have been. That being said, these 1.5mm screws have already reared their ugly little heads. I didn't quite get the bit all the way in this one, and it definitely was slipping. We should be able to take a closer look at the slipper clutch here. We do have a steel spur gear and a standard looking slipper clutch with friction material on both sides. Connecting that slipper clutch to the front drivetrain is a nice steel center drive shaft. I definitely want to take a look at one of these differentials. Unfortunately, this does not have the easy access style differentials that allow you to just get to them from the rear, so we're gonna have to take everything off the top. We'll start with disconnecting this bumper brace. There's not a lot of room in here for power tools, so we'll have to take these 2 screws out by hand. I'd love to see Rlaarlo switch all of this to 2mm head screws. I know that would probably require some serious redesigning, but for ease of maintenance, it really does make a difference. Now we'll get that brace out of there. And it looks like we just need to take these 2 shocks off. These upper shock posts are just common screws, which should make replacing them pretty easy if they get bent. And these shocks are really nice for a small basher. They've got aluminum bodies. And my favorite type of shock cap, which is a metal threaded piece with a plastic top. This makes it nice and strong so the threaded piece won't pop off, but still gives you a little bit of flex on the top so that it won't end up bending or breaking in a crash. And removing this, we can see we've got a pretty standard looking bladder style shock. These shocks do feel fairly smooth, if not fully filled. I'm gonna leave them the way they came though, because that's how you would experience it out of the box. So what do you think so far? Do you think this thing is gonna be an absolute Grom killer? It's fairly similarly priced, and if you take into account how much it costs to make a Grom brushless, it's actually quite a bit cheaper. But of course, there are gonna be some disadvantages, which we'll talk about later. So getting this apart isn't too bad. You will have to take the brace, the slipper clutch cover, the back brace for this bumper off, both shocks at the top, and then 6 screws. Definitely not as easy as some, but not as hard as others. And here we have the differential, and this feels fluid filled. The ring and pinion gears are sintered steel, but they're pretty big for this size of vehicle. Now you might be asking yourself why I'm comparing this to a Granite Grom when the Granite Grom's actually quite a bit smaller. I've got two reasons for that. The first one is that I think all of these small cars are kind of in the same category and fit similar purpose. But more importantly, Arrma has kind of opened themselves up to comparison with these larger vehicles by releasing the Mojave Grom, which is very similar in size to this truck. Of course, they're not the same type of vehicle, but they are similar in size, and as you saw in one of my previous videos, you can make the Mojave Grom into a monster truck. Now, popping the ring gear off this, we can see that we have a fully sealed differential here with fluid in it. This is fantastic to see and really gives you a lot of tuning options. Attaching those differentials to the wheels, we have these nice looking dog bones, and combining that with this differential, that means we have an all steel drivetrain from the motor all the way to the wheels. Let me get all this put back together and we'll see just how strong that all steel drivetrain is. All right, straight out of the box, let's see how fast she is. Oh, she's got pep. This thing's gonna be a handful, I can tell you that already. Full throttle. Whoa! Full throttle. Oh, she's pretty stable. Let's see if we can get one more pass out of her. Woo-hoo-hoo. Let's see how fast that was. 45 miles an hour. That is really good for one of these little cars and probably the fastest out of the box I've ever seen. Let's see if she can bash. Well guys, this thing is absolutely wild. I had fully intended to put 4S in this thing and then take it off the big ramp, but this thing's got so much power out of the box that I think I'm gonna leave it on 3S, take it off the big ramp, then maybe put it on 4S if it survives that. The only problem I've had so far is we lost the power switch. Unfortunately, I think they're still using the old style of double-sided tape on the power switch. The ESC, on the other hand, is still holding strong. So when you get one of these, I definitely recommend swapping out the adhesive on the power switch to some VHB so it doesn't end up getting chewed up in your tires and destroying the ESC. I'm pretty sure this is the most powerful out-of-the-box small basher that's ever been made. It kind of reminds me of the Savage XS, though the Savage XS really couldn't handle the power, and I'm curious to see if this thing's gonna be able to handle the power when we take it off the big ramp. I will just get this stuck back down. Hopefully it won't come off again. I'm gonna get this battery recharged. Let's see what this thing can really do. Okay guys, well we finally did break it. We've got a bent rear shock tower. However, the front shock tower is fine and the chassis is still perfectly straight. But what stopped us was a screw came out of this upper link in the front, and unfortunately that led to this front CVD shattering. It's very likely that the CVD just ended up at an angle it was never designed for. That being said, so far overall this thing's a little tank and I'm having a lot of fun with it. Unfortunately, we're not going to be putting 4S in it today because I don't have a replacement CVD yet, and that brings me to probably the biggest downside to one of these vehicles, and that's going to be replacement parts. Looking at Rlaarlo's website right now, you can see that they do have pretty much all the parts available for the Omni Terminator, though there were some issues with parts availability for a while. And of course, whatever parts you need, you're going to be buying from Rlaarlo or a place that gets it from them. Upgrades could also be a concern. As you saw in my Omni Terminator upgrade video, they had a ton of upgrade parts available, and I expect they'll probably do the same thing with this. And if they do, we'll definitely be making a video about that. But again, you're probably going to be buying upgrades from Rlaarlo and only from Rlaarlo. And that's where the ROG1 has a big disadvantage over the Groms. Parts availability and upgrades are going to be far more ubiquitous for these than for this. Now that being said, you get a lot more for your money. This thing's gonna be $150 on pre-sale, and for that you're getting a bigger truck, bigger tires, brushless power system, faster, more powerful, more stuntable, probably similarly durable, though we don't really yet know the long-term durability of these. Clearly it's made by the same company that makes the Omni Terminator. The Omni Terminator is pretty durable. I expect this will be too. So what do you guys think about the new ROG1? Is this now the little pocket basher to beat? I think it puts up some serious competition, and I've had a lot of fun with mine, and I've had a lot of fun hanging out with you. If you had fun too, make sure you get subscribed, then join me in one of these videos.